Becoming man and machine, power extreme.
How did the Centurions cartoon end? Hello guys, welcome back. Centurions is one of those cartoons that many people do not think about every day, but the moment someone mentions Power Extreme, everything just comes rushing back. There's the beam-down weapon systems, the giant exoframes, Doc Terror trying to conquer the world, and action scenes that looked better than most American cartoons of that time, to be honest. It had a really out-of-the-box idea, memorable characters, and animations that made it feel bigger than many of the other toy-based shows that were going on along with it during that time. If you look back, Centurions really had everything going for it. Starting with a strong concept, a toy line built around its coolest gimmick, and even animation that gave the action a very different feel compared to its competitors. I mean, this should have been another long-running 1980s franchise besides names like Transformers or G.I. Joe, right? But the strange part was, Centurions never got an ending. There was never an episode which could be promoted as the grand finale. The series had simply reached the end of its production and quietly disappeared, which left the fans to figure out for themselves where the story was actually supposed to end. So what actually happened here? Was there ever a real final episode? And if not, why do so many fans point to completely different episodes as the ending? And was Centurions originally supposed to have a proper finale before it quietly disappeared? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out today, because the story behind how Centurions ended is actually way more complicated than most people realize.
Becoming man and machine, power extreme.
Power Extreme, the show that should have been huge. If you've never watched Centurions, or it has been years since you last saw it, the basic idea was pretty simple, but at the same time it was nothing like anything else on television back then. The story had taken place in the near future, where technology had become both man's greatest achievement and its biggest threat. Doc Terror was the one standing at the center of the threat. He was a brilliant scientist who turned into a cyborg because he believed the future belonged to machines and not people. With him was his loyal partner, Hacker, who spent almost every episode creating new robots, cybernetic weapons, and elaborate schemes to take over the world. The only thing that was standing in his way was a small team of elite heroes who were known as the Centurions. Instead of having superpowers, they relied completely on technology. Whenever there was any danger, they suited up in lightweight exoframes, while Crystal Kane, who worked aboard the orbiting Skyvault space station, beamed down different weapon systems depending on the mission. It didn't matter if the fight was underwater, on land, or in the air, the heroes could instantly swap equipment to match the situation, and those transformation sequences became one of the biggest selling points of the show. Max Ray was the one leading them. He was a calm and intelligent sea operations commander who usually acted as the group's strategist. And then there was Jake Rockwell, who was the rugged land operations specialist whose attitude and strength made him the team's pillar. The third member of the original team was Ace McCloud, who was the air operations expert and a fearless pilot who loved showing off almost as much as he loved flirting. Their personalities were different, but that was exactly what made the team work so well. Of course, none of this had happened by accident. Like many cartoons of the 1980s, Centurions was closely tied to a toy line. Kenner had built its action figures around the exact same modular weapon that was shown in the show, that let the kids swap equipment, attach different weapon packs, and create those famous beam-down transformations at home. But the toys were only a part of what made the Centurions feel different. The series itself was produced by Ruby Spears Productions, which was a studio already known for making cartoons during the 1980s. However, what really gave the show its unique look was its animation, which was handled by the Japanese studio Sunrise. Even though Sunrise wasn't credited on screen, its influence was very easy to notice. It gave Centurions a much more anime-like feel, which doesn't really make it feel outdated today. The ambition behind Centurions was also recognized by people who worked around the project. Comic book legend Jack Kirby, who had contributed concepts for the series, later had described it as a very good show, both in artwork and writing, but explained that went right off the air, because it was the end of the toy days. The production plan was also absolutely brilliant. Instead of making a small first season to see how the audience reacted, the creators went ahead and produced 65 episodes right from the beginning. And the number wasn't really random. Back in the 1980s, 65 episodes was considered the perfect number for weekday syndication. It allowed television stations to air one new episode every weekday for 13 weeks before starting the cycle all over again. It was the same strategy that many merchandise-driven cartoons used of that era, and it also showed that the people behind Centurions clearly believed they had another major franchise on their hands. So they basically had all the ingredients to become the next Transformer or G.I. Joe, which made its fading away even more weird. Weapon systems and human beings, the cast that carried it. One of the biggest reasons people still love the Centurions today is because the characters were really exciting to watch. Like, they did fit the typical action hero type, but each member also carried their own personality, so it never really felt like a copy of each other. Max Ray was the center of the group, and being the smartest one in the group wasn't the only thing that made him capable of being a leader. It was also his ability to work well under pressure, thinking 2 steps ahead, and his approach to handling problems with logic. But at the same time, he was never that sort of hero who simply just ordered from the sidelines. Max made sure he could stand by his team whenever a mission began, and that he could actually bring an outcome to his plans with actions. Then there was Jake Rockwell, who wasn't any different. He was known to be as the team's rugged cowboy. He also believed that simple solutions to a problem are often the best ones. He often got himself involved in fights as he didn't overthink too much, and his power made him the pillar of his original trio. He was really loyal and very dependable. He was also always willing to put himself in danger if it meant he could save innocent people. And then finally there was Ace McCloud. He was the most confident member of the team. Ace really longed for excitement. He loved flying into dangerous situations, and he barely missed a chance to flirt or show off. His confidence was often the root cause of him getting into trouble, but when things became serious, he always proved that he deserved to be right beside Max and Jake. As the series went on, the team didn't remain just 3 members anymore. Rex Charger had joined as an energy specialist, inventor, and a healthy businessman whose glowing exoframe immediately made him stand out from the rest of the team. Right after that, John Thunder was also introduced to the viewers. He was a stealth expert and skilled tracker from the Chiricahua Apache Nation. John was genuinely portrayed with respect, which gave the team another capable hero, while most of the cartoons of that era relied on stereotypes when introducing a Native American character. The Centurions also had a strong support team behind them. Crystal Kane served as mission control aboard Skyvault, coordinating missions and beaming down the team's weapon systems whenever it was needed. She was smart, capable, and mostly the only person who could keep Ace's confidence in check, which slowly developed into one of the show's longest-running romantic subplots. Then there was Lucy. She was the most intelligent orangutan, and Shadow, the enhanced Malamute, who regularly helped the team during missions. On the other side was Doc Terror, who was the cyborg scientist, and he was obsessed with turning humans into machines. He had his loyal partner Hacker beside him. There were also recurring enemies like Mako and countless robots and cyborgs along with him, who constantly found new ways to challenge the Centurions from one episode to another. From toy commercial to cult favorite, why Centurions stood out. One more reason why the Centurions is still remembered today is because it brought much more than just another opportunity of selling toys. Without any doubt, the modular weapon systems were clearly designed to match the action figures, but once you go beyond that, the show had far more creativity than most people gave it credit for. In fact, if you compare it to several other toy-based cartoons from the same era, Centurions often felt more ambitious, both visually and in the kinds of stories it was willing to tell. A big reason for that was the animation itself. As we mentioned earlier, the series was animated by Sunrise, and that influence could be seen in almost every action scene. The robots looked really detailed, the explosions had real weight behind them, and the weapon transformation sequences never felt lazy or repetitive, despite the fact that they had appeared in almost every episode. Instead of feeling like a simple cartoon transformation, they looked fast, mechanical, and surprisingly stylish. It gave Centurions a look that felt much closer to Japanese anime than most American cartoons that were airing in syndication during the 1980s, and that was one of the reasons the action still holds up really well today. The stories also became much weirder than most people remember. While most episodes followed the familiar formula of the Centurions stopping another one of Doc Terror's inventions, the writers weren't scared to experiment with different ideas. One week the team was exploring the lost city of Atlantis, and the next, they were dealing with Dracula or other supernatural threats. Episodes like Zone Dancer leaned into cyberpunk ideas, while stories such as To Dare Dominion introduced dangers so huge that they almost felt like the end of the world itself. It wasn't always grounded in robots versus robots, and that variety helped to keep the series fresh across all the 65 episodes. The show even tried to teach its audience something before the credits rolled. Some episodes ended with short educational segments where the heroes, and occasionally even the villains, explained a real scientific idea connected to the story you had just watched. They were very similar to the public service messages seen in the other 1980s cartoons, but instead of focusing on just one life lesson, Centurions remembered to mix in simple science and technology facts as well. The show also made up time for smaller character moments. Throughout the series, Ace McCloud and Crystal Kane slowly developed a romantic angle that finally paid off with a kiss in The Better Half. It wasn't the main focus of the show, but it did give the longtime viewers something else to brag about besides the action. For many fans, especially those who first discovered Centurions through Cartoon Network reruns in the 1990s, the series felt far better than its reputation as just another toy commercial. It had exciting animation, creative stories, and memorable characters that stayed with people long after it stopped coming on television. And that was exactly why the lack of a proper ending still bothers fans today. The show mattered enough to many people, which made them draw out their own ending to the series.
We'll take care of you later, Indian.
Man or Machine, the origin saga that feels like a finale. If there is one story arc that feels like Centurions was finally answering the biggest question, it had to be Man or Machine. Even though it wasn't the last episode that was shown on television, many fans looked at this 5-part storyline as one of the closest that the series ever got to a proper finale. By this point in the show, Rex Charger and John Thunder had already joined the team. The Centurions had become a stronger unit, and the battle against Doc Terror had also grown much bigger than another one of his weekly plans. Instead of introducing another new invention or a robot army, Man or Machine finally looked into the past and explained how the show's biggest villain became the people we knew. For the first time, we got to see that Doc Terror was not always obsessed with conquering the world. He was a brilliant scientist whose ideas pushed the limits of science. But as many of his experiments raised ethical concerns, he felt himself to be rejected by the scientific community, and that rejection slowly turned to bitterness, convincing him that machines were superior to humans and that the future belonged to technology and not the people. The story also spent time exploring Hacker's past. Before he became Doc Terror's loyal partner, he was a part-time criminal just trying to survive each day. For most of the show, Hacker was treated as Doc Terror's funny partner. But these flashbacks gave his character more gravity and showed that he had a life before becoming a cyborg. It didn't change who he was, but it made him feel more like a real person instead of just the villain's sidekick. The accident that changed everything was one of the most important moments of that arc. After things went insanely wrong, Doc Terror was forced to rebuild much of his own body and cybernetic parts to complete the transformation into the machine-like villain the audience had known since the beginning. But suddenly, his obsession with replacing humans felt way more personal. He wasn't trying to create a machine-controlled world just because he was evil. He truly believed machines were stronger, more reliable, and the next step in evolution. That idea became the heart of the entire story. While Doc Terror tried to spread his vision of a machine-controlled world, the Centurions fought to protect humanity, even though they also relied on advanced technology themselves. It created an interesting contrast between using technology to help people and using it to replace them. More importantly, Man or Machine felt much bigger than a normal Centurion's adventure. After it spanned for 5 episodes, it finally explained the origin of Doc Terror and Hacker, while also giving the show's central conflict far more gravity than ever before. That is why many fans think it is one of the episodes with the strongest potential. Even though it wasn't the last episode that had aired, it answered the biggest question about the villains and felt like the kind of story you would normally tell at the end of a series, which made it feel like an official ending even though it wasn't officially one.
You fool! Set your magnet to repel, not attract!
To Dare Dominion, the Lovecraftian end of the world. If you think Man or Machine was the biggest story Centurions ever told, you probably haven't been acquainted with To Dare Dominion. And honestly, this was probably the episode that felt like a finale the most. This was bigger, darker, more emotional, and the stakes were way higher than your usual Doc Terror builds another robot episode. This time, Doc Terror wasn't trying to take over the world with another machine or cyborg army. He aimed for something much bigger than that. And everything revolved around Dominion, which was his massive Arctic fortress, where he created an energy vortex that was so powerful it could wipe out, well, pretty much everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just another action cartoon anymore. It almost felt like the end of the world, and that was what made this episode so much more different and unique. The danger felt huge in a way that Centurions had never really done before. But the biggest emotional moment didn't even come from Doc Terror. It actually came from John Thunder. During the mission, John ran into his old friend Claw, who had now become one of Doc Terror's cyborg soldiers. This wasn't your typical hero versus villain fight because these two actually had history together. You could tell John didn't want to fight him, but he didn't really have a choice now, did he? Their battle ended with Claw falling to his death, and instead of celebrating, John just stood there. Later, when Ace asked him who won, John's answer was, "Nobody won." It was such a simple line, but it actually said everything one needed to know. John lost a friend and Claw lost his life. Nobody really walked away happy. For a cartoon that usually focused on cool action and giant weapons, this was insanely heavy. And that was not even the end of it. During the final battle, Dominion itself was destroyed. Now think about that for a second. This was Doc Terror's headquarters. It was basically the place villains had been operating from throughout the entire series. Blowing it up felt exactly like something you would save for the very last episode. Sure, Doc Terror and Hacker escaped, but seeing their base disappear already made it feel like something very major had changed. That was exactly why so many fans pointed to Dare Dominion as the real ending. You got the biggest threat in the series, one of the most emotional character moments, and the destruction of the villain's home base, all in one story. If someone told you this was the series finale, you would probably believe them. The weird part again was that it wasn't, and the show kept going on like absolutely nothing had happened.
I thought that went well, Syntax. Yes.
The better half, when the villains become their own worst enemy. Then there's the better half, and honestly this episode was just weird, but also in the best way possible. It was one of those late series stories that somehow managed to be completely ridiculous, while also feeling like it could have been the show's finale. So here's what happened. Doc Terror and Hacker temporarily separated themselves from their cybernetic bodies for a mission. Pretty normal so far, right? Except their machine halves don't sit there doing absolutely nothing. Instead, they literally combine together and become a brand new villain called Uniborg. And yeah, that is the actual plot. And here's where it got more interesting. Uniborg didn't care about Doc Terror or Hacker. It saw itself as the better version of both of them, and almost immediately decided to take over. After spending the entire series trying to replace humans with machines, Doc Terror suddenly had to deal with a machine that wanted to replace him. To be honest, that was probably the biggest case of karma in the whole show. The episode never really tells you what happens next either. Once the Uniborg was defeated, it begged Doc Terror not to destroy it, reminding him that it was literally made from parts of both him and Hacker. Doc raised his weapon, and that was when the episode just ended the scene, and that's it. We never actually got to see whether Uniborg survived or got blown to pieces. Since it never showed up again, most people assumed Doc might have just finished his job, but the show left it completely open. But if we're going to be real, that was not what most people remembered about the better half. The moment everyone remembered was Ace McCloud finally making a move on Crystal Kane. For basically the entire series, Ace had been flirting with Crystal every chance he got, while she spent most of her time pretending she wasn't impressed. Then, out of nowhere, Ace kissed her right in front of the rest of the team. Was he showing off? Of course he was. That was Ace after all. Crystal wasn't exactly thrilled that he did it with everyone watching, but it was still the first real payoff to one of the show's longest running relationships. And that was why this episode felt surprisingly important. Doc Terror's own technology had turned against him, Ace and Crystal's story finally moved forward, and several character arcs actually got some kind of closure. It didn't officially end the series, but it definitely felt like the writers were starting to tie a few loose ends together. In fact, when fans had later put together an unofficial feature-length finale for Centurions, they actually kept the Ace and Crystal scenes from The Better Half because they felt like the perfect emotional ending. Most of the Uniborg story got cut off, but the romance stayed, and that alone tells you what most people remembered from this episode.
Other Centurions mount an attack on Terror's robots in New York City.
The finale that never was. Fans assemble their own ending. Here's the funny thing though, none of the episodes we have talked about so far are actually the finale, not Man or Machine, not To Dare Dominion, and not even The Better Half. The show never received a proper last episode, it just stopped. And to be honest, that was why fans spent years trying to give Centurions the ending it never had. One of the coolest examples was a fan-made feature-length finale that basically asked one simple question: what if Centurions actually had a proper ending? Several late series stories were stitched together and it was made into one proper ending instead of just treating the final episodes as a random adventure. The edit started with Man or Machine because that was where we finally learned who Doc Terror and Hacker really were. Starting with Doc Terror's origin just made sense as it made the entire story feel much bigger than another regular mission. From there, it moved into To Dare Dominion, which already kind of felt like a finale anyway. Dominion was destroyed, John Thunder's story with Claw finally came to an end, and the stakes were higher than ever before. If there ever was a point where it felt like the Centurions had won their biggest battle, this had to be it. Then the edit borrowed some of the relationship moments from Operation Starfall and The Better Half. Instead of ending everything with another battle, it let Ace and Crystal's relationship become the emotional ending. After all that action, it gave the audience a moment of silence before the credits were rolled. The fan editor also removed most of the Uniborg story. It wasn't because it was bad, but because it didn't really fit the bigger ending. He kept the focus on Doc Terror, Hacker, and the final battle made everything flow much better. Some scenes were rearranged as well, which made the edit feel like a movie instead of just putting a few random episodes together. Now obviously, none of this was official. Ruby Spears had never released a movie or announced a proper finale, and it did not even confirm that this was how the story ended. This made the fans look at the pieces that already existed and make an ending that finally felt complete. In this version, Doc Terror was finally defeated and the newer Centurions felt like the full members of the team, and the story actually got the ending it probably deserved. And honestly, that said a lot about the Centurions. The show didn't end because the writers had finished telling the story. It ended because the production had stopped after 65 episodes. The only real finale Centurions has is the one fans had built for themselves years later.
Couldn't you have waited for Saturday night for a bath? I'm going to ignore that.
So what was the actual last episode? You're probably thinking, okay, but what was the actual last episode? And honestly, that was where things started getting a bit messy. Back in the 1980s, syndicated cartoons didn't always air in the exact same order everywhere. Different TV stations could rearrange episodes however they wanted to, so the last Centurions episode you watched might not have been the same one someone else saw. That is also why you'll find different episode orders online depending on which list you are looking at. If you go by IMDb and most modern episode guides, the episode generally listed as the final one is The Better Half. But here's the weird part, it didn't actually feel like a finale at all. There was no huge final battle where Doc Terror was finally defeated, no emotional goodbye aboard Skyvault, and nobody stood together and said, "We did it." The show just ended after another mission. Instead, the story focused on Doc Terror and Hacker accidentally creating a Uniborg, a machine that didn't think twice before turning against them, while Ace and Crystal's relationship finally moved forward with their first on-screen kiss. There were important moments, especially for the characters, but nothing about the episode told you this was supposed to be the last dance. And that was really the biggest reason people still got confused about Centurion's ending. If someone showed you The Better Half without telling you it was the final episode, you would probably not be able to guess it. Doc Terror was still out there, Hacker was still by his side, Skyvault was still operating like normal, and the Centurions finished another mission, saved the day, and everything went back to business as usual. That was because the show was never written with a proper ending in mind. It simply reached the end of its 65-episode production order and stopped making new episodes. There wasn't one final script that was designed to wrap everything up. And with different stations airing episodes in different orders, the idea of a single last episode turned out to be even more confusing. Which was kind of fitting, honestly. Centurions didn't end with one big farewell, it ended with another mission that looked exactly like the one before it. And then there just wasn't another episode next week. Why it really stopped. Toys, ratings, and competition. So why did Centurions actually end? The answer wasn't some huge behind-the-scenes mystery. It actually mostly came down to business, like a lot of action cartoons from the 1980s. Centurions wasn't just made to entertain kids, it was also made to help sell toys. Every time the heroes beamed down a new weapon system or switched equipment in the middle of a fight, that wasn't just a cool action scene, it was also showing kids another toy they could ask their parents to buy. And that was simply how business worked back then. The problem with Centurions was that it entered a market that was already packed with huge names. Kids already had Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man, and several other massive franchises fighting for the exact same place on the shelf. Toy stores only had so much room, parents only had so much money to spend, and every company wanted to be the next big thing. As SYFR Wire summed it up in its retrospective on the series, unfortunately not even a cool toy line by Kenner could help keep Centurions on the air for more than a single season. That pretty much told the entire story. Centurions wasn't a failure, but it also wasn't the big break that Kenner had hoped for. On top of that, it wasn't really an easy-on-the-pockets show either. The animation by Sunrise looked visually better than a lot of other syndicated cartoons at that time. The detailed robots, the huge number of weapon systems, and all those transformation sequences weren't really a piece of cake to animate, which also meant higher production costs. Then there was a way television worked back. 65 episodes wasn't just a random number. It was the magic number for weekday syndication. Once a studio had 65 episodes, local stations could air one episode every weekday for about 13 weeks before restarting the cycle again. Unless the show became a massive hit, there wasn't really much of a reason to order another batch. And that's really what happened with Centurions. The show wasn't canceled because people hated it. It pulled it off really well to complete its original run, but sadly not enough to compete with the biggest toy brands of the decade, or justify another 65 episodes. Did Centurions deserve a real finale? Looking back now, I really do feel Centurions deserved a proper finale. But to be fair, that wasn't really how most cartoons functioned back in the 80s. They weren't made to tell one long story from beginning to end. They were made for syndication so that the episodes could air in any order. A big emotional ending just wasn't something studios had focused on. The crazy part was that Centurions already had everything it needed for one. Man or Machine finally explained Doc Terror's past and the reason behind the entire conflict. To Dare Dominion gave us the biggest battle in the series, destroyed Dominion, and wrapped up John Thunder's story with Claw. Then, the better half finally moved Ace and Crystal's relationship forward. If those episodes had been planned as one final storyline, with Doc Terror finally defeated and the whole team getting one last moment together, people would probably remember Centurions very differently today. Instead, the show had just disappeared, which left fans in their own delusion to decide where the story really ends. And maybe that is why people still choose to talk about it. Everyone has their own favorite ending, and none of them is really wrong here. For a show that lasted only 65 episodes, that was a pretty cool legacy. Sometimes, the stories that don't get a perfect ending are the ones you can never stop thinking about. Even though Centurions was over, it couldn't completely disappear. During the 1990s, Cartoon Network had introduced the show to a whole new generation, and later it also managed to become a part of Boomerang's classic lineup. And for a lot of people, this was their first time hearing Power Xtreme, and that was one of the biggest reasons why the show still carries such a loyal fan base. And that's how Centurions ended. It didn't end with one huge final battle or a proper goodbye, but with a few different stories that just felt like endings, even though none of them officially were. and maybe that is why fans still talk about it today. After all, everyone has their own idea of where the story really ended, and honestly, I feel that is kind of cool. But what about you? Did the Centurions deserve a real series finale, or are you okay with the ending we got? And if you had to pick just one episode as the perfect ending, which one would it be for you? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.